Now we need to go from sales enablement, I would suggest, to buyer enablement. And what is buyer enablement? It's giving the information to the buyer so that they can select themselves. And to me, buyer enablement is getting as much of the stuff that was created once upon a time for sales and that is gated, we could use that term, gated behind a sales relationship with a salesperson, put it on the website, make it easily found, make it freely accessible so that your buyers have more information to confidently select you as the right fit for their situation.
Welcome back to the Thoughts on Selling podcast. Today, it is my delight to have David Kirkdorffer on as one of my esteemed guests. In fact, he's the only guest today, and we're going to have a good time talking about sales and marketing. For those of you who are watching video, you'll see that David has his marketing hat on. David, did you also bring the silver bullet?
No, but I have a wooden stake.
You have a wooden stake. So you have a stake in the matter.
I do have a stake. Well, perhaps later on we will have a stake in the matter, yes.
It could be. I like mine done medium rare. So the first question I ask of a guest is, who is David?
Who is David? Okay, so the David that is before you today is the sum of experiences that have been in the career of B2B technology marketing. I've been doing this for about 35 years. Yeah, let's just use that number. And I've been...
We'll bleep it out.
Well, that's fine. I've been the person in marketing whose job it is to make sales happy. So I've often had that demand generation role where I'm using marketing budget to create marketing programs, or as we used to say back in the day, sales programs that would help generate leads that sales reps would want to follow up on. So that's been, broadly speaking, my heritage. As my career has advanced, I've done other things too, as I've kind of climbed up the ladder, but that's always been a core. And so one boss said, David, you're kind of connective tissue between our department and sales.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had that sales-centric, how do we do marketing that's sales-centric that has an impact? And how do we do sales programs that have an impact that communicate to customers? So in a way, I have this perception of myself as being a liaison into the company from the customer base, how best to communicate to the customers, and how best to communicate in ways that attract people to us and bring curious souls who would like to speak to sales. So that's a bit about me. Otherwise, you can hear from my accent, I was born in England. I'm a US citizen, have been here for a long time. And in my misspent youth, I thought I was going to be a rock star. So,
a rock star?
Rock star, of course, right. And that was part of what brought me to America. I still record and play a little bit, but not really performing as much as before, which is probably to everyone's, betterment. But I have spent a lot of time on recording studios, mastering studios, and put out over 10 CDs over the years. So
very cool.
Those who are super curious, you can check that out. And it's still a part of who I am. So when you ask, who is David? He has this professional side doing marketing, consulting now, and not even semi-pro, less than semi-pro musician aspect.
Have you ever been paid for a CD?
Yes.
Then you are a professional musician.
Well, brief and fleeting. At some point, I realized I was probably going to make more money in this marketing thing than any money I would sustainably get from Sony Music. So I was like, But when I have done my music, I've tried to go full bore. So,
and what's the genre?
Well, now I'm just doing ambient music essentially. But before it was rock. Guitar. I play guitar, or at least I make noises through the guitar. Playing
acoustic or electric?
Electric. So for those
Sony or Nikon?
For those on camera, you can see my Tele Deluxe 72.
Oh, there you go.
And I have a lot of other guitars littering the place that my wife would say, please, can you just put them away?
My wife says the same thing about my bicycles. But we shan't talk about that again.
Okay.
So sometimes there's a divide between sales and marketing. The height of the divide was in a statement that a VP of marketing said to me once, and I reported to her. She said, I want you to prove that sales is not doing their job. And I looked at her and I said, I believe my job is to help them do their job. So I'm caught in a bit of a conundrum.
Right. As the person doing demand gen, I've had that feeling too, obviously. And then in my younger days, I might have said that. But as I learned through the school of hard knocks, as one does, I realized maybe I should phrase that differently. Maybe I could say, how can I help you find the things that would be most helpful to you? How can I help you achieve the things that are most important to you? And then they'd say, well, I'd need this and this. I need that and that. And I say, oh, well, we have those things
right
over here or over there, right? So, when you work with busy sales reps, you realize, as it used to be back in the day, they're traveling a lot. They're not sitting at the desk all day like maybe
That's right.
am. It's easier to they have lots of interruptions. So much of these, are they doing what we want them to do types of questions come from, are they interacting with the CRM, whatever that might be? And at what level are they providing detail? And to be honest, if you're doing a good job, the CRM as a service, this is how I've rolled out a few CRMs at companies. And I realize I have to make this be a service for the sales team.
Right.
There's got
to be a cookie in it for them.
It's got to be for them and not for management oversight.
Right.
Now, you may have management oversight that happens, but there's got to be enough of a factor of how this helps them make their lives easier, pragmatically, practically, day to day.
Right. David, there's 1,000 salespeople cheering you on right now.
Well, hi, and I'm here. So, and there are many others like me, of course, as well, right? But the point is remove what you can remove that isn't necessary. Many times we're into a particular weird detail, but many times these CRMs have got longer tenure than the VPs of sales who are in charge of them in many ways. And they often have overlays and data inputs and panels and things they're no longer valid. That tool is no longer supported. We no longer subscribe to that, but the panel still is there. So you have to kind of if you could just, declutter, remove the things that are no longer valid, remove the reports that are no longer supported by the add-ins and add-ons, take out clicks.
Sometimes even the basics need attention. When I took over sales at a business services firm a number of years ago, I took a quick look at how Salesforce was configured, and I changed a key element, and that was the progression of confidence with the stage of sales cycle, which was at that time, I think it was a default. And I said, no, I want my salespeople to tell me how confident they are at stage 3 or stage 4, not how confident the system thinks they should be. And about a day later, a young salesperson came to me and said, Mr. Levitt, I think Salesforce is broken. I moved an opportunity from stage 2 to stage 3, but the confidence level didn't change. And I said, that's right. Yeah. I want to know what you think. And she goes, but that's not how we used to do it. And I said, exactly.
And that's another aspect of this that makes it harder for sales reps. They're not all in one place, and there are many of them, and they all have their own patterns. So when anyone, now we might have RevOps make these changes. Before it used to be the Salesforce admin, right? And the Salesforce admin was often the person in charge of demand generation because they were a principal user every single day. When you make changes, you have to let the world know. And you can't just let them know once and done. You kind of need to find multiple avenues and multiple ways of letting them know. And so it's often just like with our software products, rather than a little change here, a little change there, roll out a few at the same time. Make it easier, right? For yourself and for them. Because the CRM is not their key core competency necessarily, though,
Lord, I hope it's not.
So, and if it's easy, it's like, sure, if it's helping me, I'm going to record these details. And now we've got more technology that does more integration to make it easier to have certain details recorded.
Yeah. I do not want to be hiring Salesforce experts on my sales organization. I want them to be selling gurus.
Right. Exactly. And everyone uses a CRM for the first time in their career. And you may change companies and they have a different one. And every company has a slightly different sales process. So as you mix those three elements together, have allowances and make it easier for the sales team, give them the reports that they need, sliced and diced for them individually as much as possible. Think from their perspective, which is why sales ops is so good, because that's the unique perspective. But if you don't have a sales op because your company isn't that large and you don't have that type of specialization, they're just becoming, customer centric and your customer is sales,
Mm-hmm.
and talk to them. What's working, what's not. Here we are talking about how to get rid of the division between sales and marketing. Well, this is a great one. Talk to your sales reps. We talk about talking to our customers. Talk to your sales reps. It used to be easier to do that when we were in the office.
Right.
There would be some number of sales reps in our local office. We could walk to them and ask them some questions, get a sounding board on this or that. Oh, you didn't know that we had this thing? Give them a little update. If you're working from home, and if you're in a big company, of course, big companies were also overwhelmed by the people around us in our own department. And depending on our function in marketing, we maybe don't have many opportunities to speak to salespeople directly. But there's always a benefit for marketing folks, whether you're doing content or PR or events, to be able to speak to sales and get their perspective on how are things being understood by you.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you think customers are understanding it?
Right. So in my experience, there's several different views of the customer and what the customer needs. There's product management that has its perspective of, we're building this thing to sell to these people so that they can do this. Or maybe we're building this thing because we can, and you go figure it out. And then there's marketing, which says, so we've done research and we've done studies and we've bought industry research reports, and we think this is the market we should go after, and this is who we think we should sell to. And here are the major talking points. And then there's the salesperson that says, I got to go make some money. I got to hit quota. I'm going to go talk to the first 10 people that will talk to me and ask them what's keeping them up at night. And all of that's wrong.
I think what you've described are roles that exist. And in different sized companies, you have different ways of addressing the roles, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in a startup situation, many times the product manager is the CEO or the chief technology officer or the person who is the origin source of the technology idea.
Right.
And until you get to a certain scale, that head of the company retains that product marketing, product management kind of mindset, which sometimes becomes a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about founder-led sales, right?
Yep.
Well, it's founder-led product roadmap developing, right? And they do that because they have experience in the space.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be one of these. I used to do a thing like this. I encountered this problem in 3 different companies. You know what?
Right.
It's a pervasive problem. Let's see if I can solve that problem. So that's a great kind of heritage for a company to have, right? And so you start a business based on that and so forth. So you do have genuine insight. Where it becomes problematic for the rest of the company is when you as CEO legitimately have so many other things you need to spend time on too, that while you are still the most knowledgeable person for the purposes of product marketing in many ways, because you really understand the customer more than anybody else who you've hired, you don't have time to service all those growing marketing functions that are there.
Mm-hmm.
So demand gen needs access to subject matter experts. PR needs access, and PR actually gets away with because they get to speak to the CEO more often than many other groups because they are the ones who are making introductions and making connections and so on. The digital team needs to understand things about their work, to do their work well. So all of a sudden, the CEO who has legitimate needs to talk to finance and sales and development and all these groups just doesn't have the bandwidth to support the rest of the marketing function in the way that a dedicated product marketer would be to do. So there is oftentimes that bump in a company's development. I don't see people talking about that very much. We do hear about CEO or founder-led sales.
Yep.
And that's kind of in the similar vein.
Mm-hmm.
The CEO has experience doing something, and he or she has access to resources that regular sales reps typically don't have.
Right.
So when a developer or a head of development or a sales engineer gets a call from the CEO, hey, I want to show the customer this thing, next week. Can we develop it? That might happen. Whereas if sales rep number 2 or number 3 says, hey, I want to show this, and the person on the line says, I'd like to, but I don't know exactly how to shuffle all the other things. Let me see what I can do.
Right.
And maybe it doesn't happen. So That's in a startup situation. When you're in a much larger organization, the kind of skill you need is... if you are one, let's go back to the startups. If you're one of those early stage startup salespeople, you might be kind of in a missionary sales role. We're still Series A.
Yep.
We have a capability set. It's getting better. We haven't exactly figured out the best way to message on this yet, or what the best use cases might necessarily be.
Mm-hmm.
So those first sales reps are evangelists and need to be, they are actually almost quasi product managers of a project to deliver capability to a customer.
And conduct market research.
They're
at the same
providing
time.
feedback.
Yep.
They are not necessarily following prescribed messaging because it
hasn't been built.
It may not be very developed, and
Yep.
it may not fit the sales case that they're developing. And at first, if as a marketing person, it helps to realize I am in a startup and I'm working with 3 evangelist type sales reps. This is different than being in a series late B or C, where we're not trying to figure out how to sell it. We're now trying to do the cookie cutter thing a bit more.
Right. Yep.
And so sometimes we realize this, and then the situation changes. So as the company goes to Series B and Series C, that first sales rep who loves the idea of creating something new, and that's, I'm going to take this raw putty and try and create something for my customer, may feel constrained when it turns into, now we're selling cookie cutter stuff.
Yep. The conversation changes from figure out what we need to do.
That's it.
Be an entrepreneur.
Right.
To you have a number, stay in your lane.
Or rather, please don't reinvent the wheel. It creates chaos for us. At the beginning, we're okay to the chaos because we need the income to keep afloat, to stay viable.
Yep.
I mean, A round is kind of like build it. B round is figure out how to message it. And C round is now take one of those channels and double down, because in theory, hopefully, I'm being a little simplistic here, but we gave you money to build it. Now we gave you money to figure out how to market it. Now we're going to give you money to kind of like double down and make some money for us.
Right. It's Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank. Tell me your customer acquisition cost and tell me how much money you want to generate now, and what it'll take. So if I give you $1, will you give me 5 or will you give me 1,000? Right. It's the input and output.
And so as a marketer, it's good to know what kind of reps you're working with, what kind of stage you're in. If you've come from a background where you're always in late B round, and then you come to a startup that's a bit earlier on, you've got a lot of good stuff to bring in and help the team build, of course.
Yeah.
But you may need to have a slightly different attitude where you actually do need to create one-off documents for individual sales scenarios.
Right.
As opposed to, I don't want to create one-off documents, because if I did that when we had 400 reps, that would be absolutely nuts, or even 20. But when you've got 3, that needs to be part of the definition of that moment. At this time, this is okay. As we grow bigger, that can't be okay going forward. And so often when we're transitioning, sales reps from the one era expect it still in the next era, and vice versa with the marketers too, right? They don't know. So it's understanding, and really that comes out when the heads of these departments acknowledge the situation and say, okay, we no longer can ask for that stuff, or we have to support that stuff because of who we are, right? And we calibrate a little bit. But that's some of the disconnects that I've seen when we're speaking about alignment. So, if you're a startup marketing person and listening to this, I hope this is helpful to help kind of like, oh, that explains why we're on such different pages. Because the expectation may need to be different in different phases of your company's history.
Yeah, I've lived that directly. In one of my startups, we hired a traditional salesperson way too early, and he had nothing to do, right? We really needed him to do more research beyond what my partner and I could do, because we only had 23 and a half hours in a day each. Well, he was in the UK, so he was in the Cotswolds, so he had extra time because he would work all night while I was asleep, but then he would work all day too. I still haven't figured that out, but we hired a sales guy because we wanted him to sell, and we had nothing to sell. We were still building and packaging, and he quit after a few months, which was totally our mistake. And then years later, I joined a startup that was fairly well developed. The company had hundreds of accounts, hundreds of customers, and the CEO, who was one of the founders, said, I want you to use my 100-slide deck to present to your prospects. And my prospects were strategic accounts, including IBM and GE and others. And they didn't want to see that founder slide deck. And I said to him, Michael, I sell using a whiteboard. I want to go through their workflow. And this was a predictive analytics platform. And I wanted to understand where things were falling out of their marketing and sales funnels. And he said, well, I really need you to do it my way. You're fired. And that was okay. Because in my experience, the conversations that I was having with those accounts, they didn't want to know the history of that company. I was already in the door. They already knew that part or not. And it didn't matter to them, right? This gets to a fundamental question of what's the purpose of selling? And in a recent podcast, Jeff Lipsius joined and said, the purpose of selling is not selling, it's buying, right? The purpose of selling is to actually get someone to take an action to put capability in their hands that improve their business. And so nobody cares that this particular company was founded inside of EMC and then went out on its own and blah, 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 right? Totally irrelevant. Will it help us with our funnel? Yes or no?
It has a relevancy, but only up to a point. There is context that could be useful to know, but maybe that can be just contained instead of 100 slides to 2 or
one.
3 or whatever number it needs to, right? A shorter number to kind of to make it less about me, the vendor, and more about you, the customer.
We'll leave it in the appendix. Yeah. So David, what are you seeing in terms of trends before and after? And David looks at me and goes, before and after what?
What exactly? Or when?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's marked by the explosion of Zoom as a publicly traded stock in 2020 when everyone went virtual and customers became yet more focused on not capability, but risk management and the challenge of making a decision, right? If I'm a customer, I'm going to be smarter than all of the salespeople selling me their product because I can go and research that. Dr. Google allows me access to, every piece of information in the world. But that salesperson doesn't know all that stuff. They haven't studied that stuff. They certainly don't know a lot about the competitors. And so Matt Dixon in The Jolt Effect says the world shifted, at that point, in 2020, where customers really were focused on I know what I need to know, but by the way, they also don't know what they don't know. So they're still flying blind. And mostly they're looking to manage risk. And the easiest way to manage risk is to do nothing.
Well, yes, certainly it takes away certain types of risks when you don't do anything. So my perspective is...
It's the difference between fast death, you made the wrong decision, you're out, and slow death of, we're going to continue to suffer with the existing platform.
That's right. We've got a leaky boat, but we're not sunk yet.
Right.
Exactly. So what I've seen happen is, and what COVID and work from home and that kind of interruption in normal life brought was a dramatic acceleration of what had already been happening before. What was happening before? Prospects were not answering emails.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't picking up the phone when you called them. So for a lot of technology companies that had an outbound motion around digital marketing, and whether they reported into marketing or sales, but telemarketers, SDRs, BDRs, we've got all sorts of words that we've used over the years for these types of for people who are cold calling. Okay, so go back to let's say 2000. It used to be that when marketing found someone who downloaded a document and provided contact details, there was a certain amount of legitimacy to say that's a win, because we didn't know what their email was. We didn't know what their phone number was.
Right.
Okay. Because that wasn't such prevalent information to be found. Today, of course, and going back to 2016, even, 10 years ago, there were databases full of this stuff and a company could subscribe to it. And now instead of marketing going, woohoo, we've got the assistant director of compliance automation over at Visa, just the man we want, or just the lady we'd like, right? The sales guy says, yeah, his name is, Bob Jones. I already have his contact details. Tell me something I don't know.
Right.
Right. So that shift is really fundamental. So at the same time, so what have I noticed? No one's answering the phones. No one's replying to emails. People are turning off the functionality to open up an email and fire back the cookie that the email was open. So we don't, right? Because why is that happening? Well, partly because there are more and more vendors in every category trying to reach me. So the quantity of outreach has just scaled up, right? So back in the day when there were just, imagine there was a time when there were only 100 software companies in the world, because it existed for a long time, actually.
Right.
You would only get so many phone calls. When there's 100,000, baby blue. It's crazy, right? So that was happening. And when COVID struck, it just accelerated it, because now all of a sudden people are not connected to their work phone and their work extension and their work emails. Now they're working from their mobile phone.
Yep.
And all of a sudden you didn't have that data, right? And then, of course, the data providers were like, oh, crikey, we've got to get this data now because this is the data that we need. And they have, and so on. So that's going on. At the same time, while we're working from home now, we're plugging into Slack channels a lot more. And all these little groups and communities formed. Listeners here may have done Zoom calls that attached to a community on Slack. I was in a few of them myself, right? And now you had peer-to-peer exchange much more easily. It was back in the day before COVID, we went to the office, we did our thing, we kind of commuted back and forth, we had lunch maybe at our desk, or maybe we went out. But you didn't meet a lot of other people at other companies in other parts of the country doing the same thing as you so much, unless you were a natural-born kind of networker. And then all of a sudden, we found lots of online communities that we could join, partly out of self-preservation because it was so lonely working at home, partly because, hey, I can do this and nobody knows, maybe, if I'm not on a corporate device. And so I could ask people, hey, what are you guys doing for X? We're thinking about doing something. And so this notion of dark social took off. So back in 2012, the Atlantic news magazine noticed that people were coming to the Atlantic as a direct hit on a web page rather than some kind of search.
Right.
And they said, what's going on? And so one journalist kind of dug into it, and he discovered what was going on is Bob would send an email to Mary and say, Mary, you got to check out this article. It's really cool. Here's the link. And all of a sudden that created a direct link.
Right.
And there was a lot of that going on. And so he coined the term dark social, which is dark because the measuring tools of the day couldn't source it. It just kind of came.
No attribution.
And the URLs were like ridiculously long URLs that no human or only one monkey every 2,000 years would ever be able to type in, right?
I think they recently disproved that theory.
Probably. Well, Shakespeare is a whole lot more work than just a URL. So we'll give him that, right? So that was going on. So what does this teach me? Okay, so I said I was kind of a liaison between sales and marketing.
Yeah.
And I would create a lot of sales enablement content. And so I want to kind of like launch into a bit of a conversation around sales enablement turning into buyer enablement, if you think that's a good thing to do.
Absolutely. It is absolutely a good thing to do because buyers do need that enablement, right? They do need the shaping of, so if I'm a buyer, I'll go visit a vendor's website and I'll get their propaganda. And then I may go look at, third-party websites and look at some comparisons. I might talk to some peers who have experience in that ERP or predictive analytics or whatever application. But I'm not enabled to actually take action yet because I have all this information in a pile on my desk, but I don't know what to do with it.
Well, it depends on where you are in your need hierarchy, I guess, right?
Yep.
So over the years, back in the early days, the only place you could get really information about a solution was the vendor.
Was from the salesperson, right?
That was it, from the vendor themselves. And then you spoke to a sales rep, and that person became kind of like a salesperson trying to help you understand what it was. And the tech of the day, when that was the case, was really tech for tech people. It wasn't tech for business people per se so much. It was really tech used to create more tech. So you sold to the IT department, the technology used by the IT department to build things for the company. Everything was custom built. Okay. Along comes the internet. We get more transparency. We get open source. We get mobile. We get SaaS, different price points, different availability. And now we can get information from websites and learn. But still, there's a strong sales led motion in place. And sales reps, when they spoke to you, would share information with you that you couldn't find on the website. Various things to do with the technical implementation, various things to do with how ROI might be calculated.
What happens after I say yes?
Right. Various things to do with introductions to other customers who you could speak to when the time was right, when it was appropriate for a reference, that type of thing. And so marketing groups, product marketing, various different teams within marketing would create comparison, cheat sheets, all sorts of stuff that sales reps would have and that they could use to enable the sales process. It was there to help the salesperson with the sales process, hence sales enablement. So I guess I should change hats and put on my sales hat, right? Because I wanted to be a consumer of that stuff. And I, as I was saying, as a solo marketer in a startup, you're creating a lot of sales enablement one-off stuff to help that sales deal, that sales deal, that sales deal. And eventually some of it might be repurposed. Great. But then when sales reps are not able to sell because they can't speak to people, and because customers don't want to speak to sales reps, and they have more access to information themselves and dark social, now we need to go from sales enablement, I would suggest, to buyer enablement. And what is buyer enablement? Well, like your buddy, the salesperson who was saying, we're here to help buy you, right? It's giving the information to the buyer so that they can select themselves. So they want information. As you say, a lot of websites are a bit fluffy, don't answer some of the harder questions. But research from Kerry Cunningham, Kerry Cunningham, over at 6 Sense, for example, and he used to work at Serious Decisions for those people who are familiar with that company before it was purchased by Forrester. Yep. And is kind of responsible partly for the whole waterfall that we have a love-hate.
Not partly. They invented it.
Well, they invented it. I think he was part of it, but maybe peripherally on that waterfall side. But anyway, point being, his research recently, current research from him shows that about 80%, maybe it's 74% of the buyer's process happens before they contact and reveal themselves to any vendors.
Right.
And then, even further, 74% of them, I think it is, the first vendor they contact is the vendor they choose to buy. So hold on and think about those two things. They did all this stuff without you, and the one they contact first, 74% of the time, I'm not remembering the exact numbers, so please forgive me, Kerry, is the vendor they end up selecting. So where did they get enough information to feel confident enough to have done all that without speaking to anyone? They went to G2 and Capterra or Gartner Insights to get some kind of like independent, quasi-independent, like, here's what it was like for me to do these things. So they got some third-party corroboration. They spoke to their buddies and their peers and got some information. Websites now provide more information than they ever used to do. Right. So the prospect was confident enough that they knew who their selection set should be, and they also pretty much knew who they thought they were going to buy from. And if you're a brand with recognition in your space, this may not be the first time that person has bought from you. Right. They may, right? So leading brands have got a leg up on startups in this respect. So all of that context tells me buyer enablement is critical. And to me, buyer enablement is getting as much of the stuff that was created once upon a time for sales and that is gated, we could use that term, gated behind a sales relationship with a salesperson to get it, to see it. Put it on the website, make it easily found, make it freely accessible so that your buyers have more information to confidently select you as the right fit for their situation. So that's my kind of soapbox moment. Perhaps it's the first, perhaps it'll be the last. I don't know. We'll see how we go.
No, I think your point is spot on that buyers go through more of their process. And by the way, there is no one buying process, right? Each buyer does things in a different sequence, different set of steps. And it's up to them to assemble the pieces they want, right? You're not following our selling process. Too bad for you, right? And so the challenge then becomes, so there's two things. One, I like to live in the world in which the customer has not yet identified that the problem is easily solvable. They just know that something could be different. And I'll use an example that I use maybe a little too often, but I met with the head of operations at Southwest Airlines a few years ago. And I asked how he did analytics for his business, for his operations. And he says, well, I get all the data batched. So I know exactly what happened yesterday. And I asked him, what if you could, right? The art of the possible. What if, I painted a story for him. I said, what if Billy Bob is at Houston Hobby and his bag isn't coming out? And he tweets at Southwest Airlines. Hey, Southwest, you stink. What happens to that tweet? And he said, this was back when tweeting was okay. And it was actually tweeting. Now it's not socially acceptable. He says, well, that would go in, marketing would grab that, and that would go into sentiment analysis. And in 6 months, we'd look at that accumulated data and say, Houston Hobby doesn't perform as well as Vegas. So we should do something about that. I said, but Charlie, I don't remember what his name was, but Charlie, Billy Bob just sent you an early message that his bag isn't coming out and that maybe there's a problem in the back, right? There's a trolley that's down and there's 3 people trying to get that cart upright and no one's bothered to hit the big red button saying, Houston, we have a problem. What if you could get that early warning in near real time of a problem in your operations environment? So rather than you understanding what happened yesterday, you could know right now. And this was something that was not in consideration. He had no budget for it. He had no specs. He had no vendors in mind. He wasn't doing research. And his response was, can you do that? And the answer back we gave, yes. And he said, I'll take 2. Right. So we do have to distinguish among the various sets of opportunities. I just had a conversation with a coaching client at a 3-letter company. I won't mention the name. The color is blue. I said, let's think about a big swing, right? For each of your accounts, let's come up with a big swing. Let's figure out what the home run is. And his response was, well, we've got something going. No. This is not something going. This is where you personally substantively influence the operations of the organization. It may be a $5 or $20 million deal. It might be a $50,000 opportunity that grows into something bigger, but it's different than we need to update our servers from 9 to 11. They know that. What they're counting on you to do is to bring opportunities to them that they're not aware of within their organization. And so the server piece is more what you've described. Customers doing the research. Should we stay with Power? Should we go with HPE? Should we do this? Should we do that?
Perhaps. It depends.
Mm-hmm. Because it always depends.
There are new categories of technology.
Absolutely.
Technology goes through its own, we've got the hype cycle, which is, whether we argue about how tall or how long, that's fine. But the concept is a good, interesting one. But we've got emerging categories of technology and we've got stable categories of technology. Mm-hmm. And what you're talking about is applications of the technology to do a thing. Yep. Right? So that's where our founder, earlier in our conversation, has an insight into a thing that is constantly present, seen it at this company and that company, others. Can I address that? So let me suggest something that's going on now that is changing. I was talking about how we have had sales enablement for decades.
Yeah.
Still do.
And before it was sales enablement, it was sales support.
Sales support, right? And then we have some number of people who talk about buyer enablement or buying enablement, mm-hmm. and then trying to get that information from behind the firewall of speaking to a sales rep and those systems and stuff, somehow making it visible and available through the website directly. So the most famous example of this, of course, is pricing. Put the pricing on your website, or no, you have to speak to me because it's a bit complicated to figure out and I don't want you to make a mistake or think of us as too expensive. I'm oversimplifying. Mm-hmm. But that's a key example of buyer enablement. You need to put the pricing on the website. You could say between this range and this range, and mm-hmm. it's a factor of these things.
Yeah.
And even that is helpful because your buyers can say, okay, I understand this stuff. And the bigger it is and the more configurable it is, the more they realize I can't really know. But you've given me a ballpark.
Right.
I kind of got what I needed to know for now. I will need more later. So now there's a new influencer in town, right? There's a brand new influencer into the equation now who's emerged. and is turning out to be really, really popular with everybody. AI.
Mm-hmm.
So now we might talk about AI enablement. Well, what are we doing there? Well, just like we used to provide all this good information to the analysts so that they could really know who we are and hopefully write about some of these things and all these cool things so that because they have elevated conversations with the right types of people that we want to speak with, because those people are calling the analysts as part of their service. Hey, I saw your Magic Quadrant report on this.
Yep.
Here's more detail about our situation. I know you've got 20 vendors on the damn thing, and you tell me that I shouldn't just pick the one in the corner because considerations have to fit my environment. So I'm telling you about my environment.
Right.
Who would you recommend we just 3 or 4? Because we don't have enough bandwidth, right?
Yep.
Okay. Used to do that with trusted advisors of various types.
Mm-hmm.
Now ChatGPT in Gemini, and to the same degree perhaps also Claude and a few others, are that trusted advisor. Because now I can go into this place that I have access to, and instead of doing a Google search, and our usage pattern in a Google search is to fit the little window that they gave us. The little window that we were given was training us, the users, don't put too much stuff in there because it's going to be too complicated for us, Google, to figure out.
Right.
Put in a couple of keywords, right? Best CRM system for healthcare.
Right.
That kind of thing, right? And through a ranking process, up come all these blue links. There's a lot of different ways that things get ranked. We call it search engine optimization.
Mm-hmm.
And as a user, we would look at some of those links and hope to find some interesting answers to the question, and we would synthesize the answer ourselves.
Right.
And now what's happening is you do the same query in the same place, and Google, because it's trying to fight in the market of AI, has decided I'm going to put AI overviews ahead of the blue links.
Right.
Because we don't want you to develop a habit to go over to ChatGPT, which everyone's talking about, and it's not us, and we would lose that traffic. Once you make that shift, and there are people. So where am I going with all this? Now we need to provide information to our websites in ways that not just our people can find and our prospects can find and assimilate. I'll use that word carefully.
Yep.
The Borg and all. So we want to assimilate it for people, but we want the machines to assimilate the information correctly too.
Right.
And it turns out that the things that we do as marketers to make that information easily assimilable by the machines is a little different for Google SEO than it is for LLMs.
Mm-hmm.
There are some different things that work better with LLMs and that are necessary and helpful. And there's a lot that's overlap. So a lot of the best practices of SEO will help your LLM visibility.
Right.
And then there are some new things. So why do I mention all this? Because I just see it's now. And by the way, the other interesting thing is, as far as any marketers or salespeople listening to this would go, when I go to ChatGPT and ask a question, I know because the window is big, and I've been trained in that environment to dump a lot of context.
Yep.
Hey, I'm looking for this. Let me give you some more context about my situation. Okay. And I'm downloading this or uploading that and all sorts of stuff, right? And I get an answer that is a synthesis of all those blue links. And the critical thing I wanted to mention is I am not leaving an intent footprint behind. Intent engines don't see that. They see the Google queries. They don't see the LLM queries.
Right.
So it's even darker.
Mm-hmm.
So there are lots of successful vendors who have provided visibility into this dark activity that buyers are doing. They haven't contacted us yet. They haven't revealed themselves to us yet.
Right.
They have used VPNs and all sorts of ways to hide their IP address. But when they do the query, I got you now, right? Or they go off to G2, I've identified you now.
Right.
Right. Now what can happen is I can hide myself even further behind. It's even darker, or I'm further in the tunnel, or whatever imagery we'd like to use.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, someone pops up and makes a phone call and tries to reach you. So takes a breath. If anyone's still listening to this, we had sales enablement. Great. Still need it. We talk about buyer enablement so that you can be found. for who you are and who you're not. And so buyers can select you. And now buyers aren't coming to your homepage and looking at your homepage and comparing 4 homepages.
Yep.
Now they're creating their own Gartner Magic Quadrant for them, themselves, with AI. And so now we need to provide that information in a way that's easily assimilable by the AIs. And there are some things I can talk about that you can do specifically that are helpful to get into the training data sets and to become found for when your buyers are asking questions about your category.
David, we're gonna have to leave. We're gonna
come back another time. Huh?
Something back. That's your honeypot. For those that want to learn more about David's expertise with LLMs and marketing, please contact David at.
This is where I put on another hat.
There you go.
Marketing Hat GPT.
Marketing Hat GPT. I like that. Who does your embroidery?
I'm not sure, actually. It's a service through Amazon. It's pretty simple. We all have access to it.
Yeah. So this episode is not sponsored by Queensboro Embroidery. And if you want great embroidery, I get all of my corporate swag from queensboro.com.
All right. Excellent.
Highly recommended.
I could do with a vendor. So people have told me I should create a store for all of these different hats. I put them on because it brings a bit of whimsy to these phone calls.
Absolutely.
Because we're sitting in these Zooms and there is a certain sameness that goes on. And it's good to have a bit of a lighter touch in some of these things. So I hope this is helpful. Was this interesting?
No, not at all.
Okay.
No.
All right. Well, I'll try back.
I hear some snoring going on very useful. Anytime we can take a half a step back and look at what's going on in the current environment and help individual salespeople or sales leaders or people that support sellers to think about what's actually happening in the market today, it's a good thing because, there's 3 types of knowledge in the world, David, and you might have heard this before. It's the circle. There's a small sliver of things we know and we know it. And there's things that we don't know and we know we don't know it, right? And then the vast majority of all the knowledge in the world is things we don't know and we don't know that we don't know it. And that's where we get caught out, right? So here's an example of something we know and we know it. It's the grass is green, right? I know the grass is green and I know it. And then here's something I don't know and I know I don't know it. What's the chemical composition of titanium? I don't know. Well, actually, probably it's just TI, but we'll leave that one aside. And then here's where I like to stump sales teams. Give me a big group of salespeople. Give me an example of something you don't know. And you don't know it. And all the sales engineers go, wait, I got it. Wait, hold on, wait. And they can't get it. So customers really value focusing on the stuff they don't know and they don't know they know it because that's where the transformation is. That's where they change how they view the world. And in the same way, I didn't know that that people were using AI agents to do more and more of their research.
I would say that in the last 5 weeks, or maybe 6 or 7 weeks now, the amount of people doing it has jump-started enormously for 2 reasons. This thing called deep research, which is just because 2 companies sell something called deep research doesn't mean the quality of it is equally deep.
Right.
So Perplexity has deep research, and it's okay, cool. The deep research you get from Gemini and or ChatGPT is a complete other order of magnitude further.
Mm-hmm.
So deep research is an enabling capability that allows me to create my own magic quadrant for, what was my example? CRMs that focus on healthcare,
right?
Whatever it might have been, right? For my type of company that's this big in this part of the country with these many sales reps, all the details, right? The other thing is that regular Google searches now place at the top above the regular blue links,
right?
More often than not, an AI overview,
right?
Which kind of answers the question you were asking for without having to click into 4 or 5 different links from 4 or 5 different vendors.
Right.
It does provide the sources. And so those 2 things offer the opportunity to a wider group of people to do what a subset and smaller group of people had already been doing. So what I'm suggesting is that it's been going on for a while, but kind of like the noise level.
Yeah.
But it's going to really take off very, very quickly. And again, this isn't all research and every research. This is the foundational stuff. But if you're not getting listed in that initial query set, you may not be looked at more deeply later by whatever other process. Just like if you were speaking to the analyst at Gartner saying, hey, you did this Magic Quadrant, who are the three? And you were the fourth. And they didn't say your name.
Right.
Crap. Excuse my German, right? I want them to say my name. So if you're a sales rep out there, funny, most of my clients come to me through their sales teams. Sales reps who say, we need better marketing. We need help with our marketing. And one way to phrase this is, our team is great, but they're a little overworked, or they need some help.
Right.
And that's often actually, I get more my clients as a consultant doing marketing through sales reps, because they can hear this. You're really focused on trying to make a difference to the opportunities that we get, as opposed to colors and logos and things like that, which are also important. I've come to respect now, but anyway, so.
David, this has been absolutely fascinating. We could go on for days talking about the alignment of sales and marketing and the support of buyer behavior, buyer enablement. Where can people find you?
Easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn. I am the only David Kirkdorffer on the planet, I think. There was once one before. He was born in 1863. So I've seen his tombstone, which is a bit weird to see your name on a tombstone. Let me just say, okay? So on LinkedIn, you can find me, David Kirkdorffer. That's Kirk, D for David, O-R, F-F, as in Fred Flintstone, E-R. And I write about these types of things, and you can just set up an appointment and book some time to have a chat with me anytime. Great.
Well, thank you. This has been fabulous. I'll put your LinkedIn URL in the show notes, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you, David.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to have an opportunity to chat with you and your audience again.
Absolutely. Thank you.